Imagine waking up in the middle of the night to the sound of screams and fire, knowing that powerful warriors are coming and no one can save you. For centuries, the samurai have been remembered as brave heroes, but what if their real history is much darker than anyone ever dared to say? Behind their shining armor, there were secrets, rituals of control, humiliation, and deep fear. Tonight we're not just telling stories of war. We're opening the doors to hidden pain and asking, what really happened in the shadows of samurai Japan? Imagine you are living in a small village in Japan 800 years ago. The night is quiet, but suddenly, you hear shouting and see torches in the darkness. Samurai warriors are coming. Most people today think of samurai as brave and honorable heroes, living by a strict code of respect and loyalty. We see them in movies fighting with swords to protect their people and their country. But what if there is another side of their story? What if there are secrets about the samurai that most people have never heard? Some stories are so dark and disturbing that even history books try to hide them. Before we go deeper, you need to know that this video will talk about topics that are very serious and might be upsetting to some viewers. We will discuss violence, control, and the psychological games that some samurai used. If you feel uncomfortable with these topics, please think carefully before watching more. If you are interested in learning about the real hidden side of history, about the things that most people never talk about, then keep watching like this video, and subscribe for more stories that reveal the truth behind the legends. But the real picture of the samurai, the part that is hidden in the dust of history, is very different. The samurai we admire might actually have belonged to a dark shadow world. Most people think of samurai as noble warriors who always followed a strict code of honor, called bushido. This word means, the way of the warrior. In stories, samurai are shown as loyal, brave, and always ready to give their life for their master or their country. They wear shining armor, ride strong horses, and carry sharp swords. Many movies and books show samurai fighting for justice, protecting weak people, and respecting everyone. But the real life of samurai was not always like the stories. Historians have found evidence that some samurai followed a shadow code, secret rules that allowed them to do things most people would think are wrong. These hidden rules were not about honor but about power and control. Sometimes, samurai used violence not just in battle, but in their own communities. They used fear to control people, and sometimes broke their own code when it suited them. Some old records and writings hint at these dark actions. There are lost chronicles, secret letters, and stories passed down in families that talk about what really happened when the samurai were in power. These sources are not always easy to find or understand, but they show that the truth about samurai life was much more complicated, and sometimes much darker, than what we see in legends and movies. The first real sign of this hidden side of the samurai appears when they attack a village for the first time. When samurai raiders planned to attack a village, they did not do it randomly. Everything was carefully organized. First, the samurai would gather information about the village, who lived there, which families had the most power, and where the leaders stayed. They did not just want to steal things or win a fight. Their real goal was to break the spirit of the people living there so that nobody would ever think of fighting back. On the first night of a raid, the village would suddenly wake up to shouts and the smell of smoke. People would see flames lighting up the sky as houses burned. Men, women, and children would try to run, but the samurai and their soldiers blocked every path. Many villagers would scream or cry for help, but there was no escape. The samurai made sure everyone in the village saw and heard what was happening, because fear was their most powerful weapon. The samurai followed a special plan during these attacks. First, they searched for the most respected families in the village. They wanted to find the village leaders, their wives, and their daughters. These were the people who held the most influence, and the samurai wanted to show everyone that even the strongest people in the village could not protect themselves or their loved ones. Sometimes the samurai would force all the villagers to gather in one place, usually the main square or a large open area, so everyone could witness what happened next. This is when the real public humiliation began. The samurai wanted to make an example out of the village leaders and their families. They would drag these people in front of the crowd and shame them, breaking their pride and their will. These acts were not just about punishment, They were meant to scare everyone and destroy any hope of resistance. When the villagers saw their leaders powerless and suffering, they understood that the samurai were now in control. But the true horror started after the raid, when the samurai celebrated their victory with special rituals in front of the whole community, rituals that were unlike anything the villagers had ever seen before. After the attack, the samurai did not just leave with their victory. Instead, they wanted to show their complete control over the village, so they created special public ceremonies. They would build a raised platform in the center of the village, forcing all the people, young and old, to gather around. No one could refuse to come. If anyone tried to hide or run away, the samurai would punish them or their families. The samurai wanted every single person to see what was going to happen. The main victims in these ceremonies were usually the wives and daughters of the village leaders. These women were chosen because they represented the honor and pride of the whole community. The samurai would dress these women in white silk robes, which in their culture was a symbol of purity and innocence. Then, in front of everyone, the samurai would slowly strip the women of their robes, taking away not only their clothes but also their dignity. This act was meant to deeply shame the victims and show the villagers that no one was safe from the power of the samurai. While these acts were happening, the samurai often performed certain rituals. They would recite prayers to their gods of war and victory, believing that these actions would give them even more strength and power. Sometimes they made the villagers repeat words or participate in the ceremony in small ways, making it clear that the entire community was being forced to take part in its own humiliation. The real purpose of these public ceremonies was not just to hurt a few people. It was to break the spirit of the whole village. When everyone saw their respected leaders and their families treated this way, they lost hope and felt completely powerless. Parents could not protect their children, and leaders could not protect their people. Fear and shame spread through the village like a disease. From that moment on, the samurai knew they had control, not just over the bodies of the villagers, but also over their minds and hearts. But for the survivors, the worst was not over. The samurai did not kill them, but instead forced them into a new kind of life, a life not of freedom but of slavery. After the public ceremonies, the nightmare for the survivors was just beginning. The samurai did not let the victims go free. Instead, they forced many of the women into sexual slavery. This was not done in a random way. The samurai created a whole system to control these women and use them for their own purposes. The samurai kept careful records of all the women they captured. They wrote down their names, ages, family backgrounds, and even details about their behavior. Some women were ranked or given performance ratings, based on how they acted or how much they pleased their new masters. This system was very organized, almost like a business. The samurai wanted to know everything about their captives so they could use them in the most effective way. High-status women, such as the daughters and wives of village leaders or important families, were often kept for special reasons. Sometimes they were forced to have children with the samurai, because the samurai believed this would make their clan stronger. These women were not allowed to return to their families, and their children were raised as proof of the samurai's power over their enemies. In some cases, high-status women were also given as gifts or used in political agreements between different samurai clans. Women of lower status were treated differently. Many were given to samurai soldiers as rewards for good performance in battle, or they were traded between clans. Some were used to serve in special houses where warriors could visit them. These places were the early version of what would later be called comfort stations, places where women were forced to provide sex for soldiers. This system was developed hundreds of years before similar practices became known in other wars, like during World War II. All of this was meant to do more than just control the bodies of these women. The system was designed to control their minds and to destroy the unity of their villages. The samurai made sure that everyone knew what could happen if they resisted. This fear kept the population under their control, generation after generation. But the real power of the samurai was not only in what they did to people's bodies. Their true magic was in the psychological experiments they created, which started centuries ago. The samurai did not stop at just using violence and slavery. They wanted even more control, so they created something called purification trials. These trials were like experiments on people's minds. The samurai wanted to see how much pain and fear a person could take before their spirit was completely broken. During a purification trial, victims, mostly women, were taken away from everyone they knew. They were locked alone in dark rooms or small spaces, sometimes for weeks. They were not allowed to speak or see anyone else. The samurai made sure the victims were always tired and hungry, so their bodies and minds became weaker every day. At the same time, they were often forced to experience different kinds of abuse, both physical and psychological. The goal of these trials was not just to hurt someone, but to break their will so much that they stopped thinking of themselves as real people. The samurai wanted to turn their victims into living dolls, humans who had no feelings, no memories, and no hope. These broken people would do whatever the samurai told them, without asking questions or showing emotion. The samurai kept careful notes about each victim, how long they lasted, what kind of torture worked fastest, and when they finally gave up. These terrible practices were not kept secret just for fun. They became part of the samurai's training system. Young samurai learned from these experiments how to control and dominate other people, not just with swords, but with fear and psychology. The leaders believed that a true warrior had to know how to break someone's mind, not just defeat them in battle. This system was not limited to women. The samurai soon made children a part of it, too. The next stage of their control was even darker, as boys were forced to watch the suffering of their mothers and sisters, and then trained to become like the samurai themselves. The samurai did not only focus on women when using their methods of control. They also targeted the boys in the villages they conquered. At first, these boys were forced to watch as their mothers, sisters, or other women from their village were abused and humiliated. The samurai did this on purpose, to fill the boys with fear and confusion, and to show them that nobody was safe from their power. But the samurai's plan did not stop there. After making the boys witness such terrible events, the samurai slowly began to involve them in the same cruel acts. Over time, the boys became used to seeing violence and suffering. The samurai trained them to stop feeling empathy, and instead to see power and control as the most important things in life. Sometimes, the boys were forced to hurt others, starting with simple tasks and moving to more serious acts as they got older. This gradual training was called desensitization. It meant making someone numb to pain and emotion, until they no longer cared about right or wrong. In the end, many of these boys grew up to become the most loyal followers of the samurai. They had been completely changed by what they saw and what they were forced to do. They understood the samurai's methods better than anyone else because they had experienced them from a young age. These boys, now young men, became enforcers of the samurai system, spreading fear and control to new villages and helping the samurai keep their power for many years. But the process of turning children into tools of control did not end with training. It grew bigger and affected the whole society, spreading into the traditions and even the festivals of the community. The samurai's control over society did not just happen in private or during times of war. They made their power clear in public, using large festivals and gatherings as a way to show everyone who was in charge. These events were more than just celebrations. They were carefully planned displays of humiliation and dominance. During these festivals, the samurai clans would often compete with each other to show who could come up with the most creative and cruel ways to control and shame their captives. The victims, who were usually women and sometimes children, were forced to perform or act out scenes of their own suffering in front of the whole community. People who had once been neighbors or friends were made to watch and sometimes even cheer, whether they wanted to or not. Refusing to take part in these events could mean serious punishment, so most people had no choice. Village leaders and respected elders were required to help organize these festivals, making them a part of the system of control. By forcing everyone to participate, the samurai turned private pain into a public spectacle. For the samurai, these events were a way to entertain themselves and also to recruit new warriors. Young men who showed skill or creativity in these cruel games could be noticed by powerful samurai and offered positions in their clans. These festivals and public displays did much more than just spread fear. They changed the way people thought and acted. Over time, The shame and trauma of these events became part of the community's everyday life. Children grew up seeing this cruelty as normal. The samurai's methods did not just hurt people's bodies, they changed their minds and even influenced the way future generations saw the world. After all these public humiliations and festivals, the samurai's ideas and control began to pass down through families and generations, changing not only people's lives but also their very way of thinking and being. The effects of the samurai's control did not disappear after a few years. Instead, their actions left deep scars on the minds of families and communities for generations. The samurai treated their victims as property. When a samurai lord died, his captives, especially women, were passed down to his children like land or wealth. Sometimes, these women were even branded with a mark to show which samurai clan owned them. This branding was both a sign of control and a warning to others. Some of the most broken women were not just kept as slaves, they were sent back to their old communities as spies. The samurai trained them to gather information and to influence others, turning victims into tools for further control. Many of these women, deeply affected by their trauma, found it hard to return to normal life. Their families and villages also suffered, feeling shame and fear that lasted for years. These practices changed the way families and whole villages behaved. People became more quiet, careful, and afraid of showing resistance. Over time, strict rules and hierarchies became normal in society. Those at the top used their power to control everyone below them, while the lower classes learned to accept their position. Trust between neighbors was broken, as anyone could be a spy or forced to betray others to survive. This way of living, the belief that power and control were more important than kindness or fairness, was passed down from parents to children. The psychological scars of trauma, shame, and fear became part of the culture itself. Even as samurai clans lost their political power, their ways of controlling people stayed in the society's habits and rules. And when we look at Japan today, we might wonder if these old wounds are still hidden somewhere inside modern society. Even today, the effects of samurai control can still be seen in Japanese society, though they are often invisible. Modern Japan is famous for its respect for order, strong work rules, and a culture where people often stay quiet instead of challenging authority. In offices, families, and schools, you can see a strong sense of hierarchy. Everyone knows their place, and questioning your boss or elders is rare. Some historians and psychologists believe this silent obedience and fear of speaking out comes, in part, from the trauma left by centuries of harsh control and punishment. The old lessons about staying quiet and following the leader, even when it feels unfair, have been passed down through generations. This invisible scar is not something you can see, but it affects how people act, make decisions, and treat each other. It is a kind of cultural trauma, wounds that never fully healed, but instead became part of everyday life. The legacy of the samurai's power and control still shapes Japan's culture, even hundreds of years later. So when we think about this history, a big question comes up. How far can human intelligence go to organize cruelty, and what can we learn from these hidden parts of the past? Looking back at these stories, we see how power, when left unchecked, can do terrible things to people and communities. The samurai system was not just about fighting battles, it was about breaking human dignity and controlling minds. But even in the darkest times, some people found ways to survive, protect others, or keep their hope alive. This reminds us of the strength of the human spirit. Learning the truth about history, even when it is painful, is important. It helps us understand where we come from and gives us the chance to heal old wounds. By talking openly about these hidden histories, we can build a more honest and kinder world. This journey through hidden history does not end here. Now it's your turn. Tell us which civilization's secrets you want us to uncover next. Thank you for watching and joining us on this journey into history's darkest corners. If you want to see more, let us know in the comments which civilization's secrets you want to explore next. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more untold stories from the past.